Welcome everyone to the Adaptive Cards community call. In this call, we're welcoming FactSet, which is going to give us an amazing demo for how they're leveraging adaptive cards for their company. After that, we will talk about our version 1.5 release, and then we can move over to some Q&A. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to Matt to share the presentation about FactSet.
Hello, everyone. My name's Matt. I'm a senior engineer at FactSet. We're a financial data services company, and we want to give you a little presentation today on what we do and how we've been utilizing adaptive cards for the last, maybe year and a half now. So we've been using it pretty extensively, and it's worked really well. So we want to dive into some of that. So first, I'm just going to give you guys a brief overview of our company. Then I'm going to dive into a little overview of Signals, which is the project that we work on specifically. We want to talk about why adaptive cards is perfect for our use case and why we chose to sort of go that route. And then we want to provide some examples of some cool stuff that we've built out using that. So without further ado, I plugged in a little video here. So again, testing the tech, but it's over dramatic and it's going to get us all hyped up about what FactSet is. So I'm going to go ahead and play that.
In today's fast-paced world, taking your ideas from concept to execution quickly is critical to developing innovative approaches and tackling complex problems. FactSet offers the ability to seamlessly discover, evaluate, and implement the data you need within your existing workflow. Expand your catalog of data with the open FactSet Marketplace, the destination for best-in-class data and solutions from FactSet and third-party providers. Leverage FactSet's deep expertise in data integrity and connectivity to unlock the true power of data. We've pre-linked data provided by carefully selected sources with our proprietary data, such as ownership, supply chain, and fundamentals. FactSet offers all the content and tools you need in one location. Access, analyze, and visualize financial data in a cloud-hosted environment, or leverage your existing infrastructure to interact with the data locally. Enjoy seamless research and production access to your data while reducing hardware costs and maintenance. Easily upload your content into a secure instance of your database, or download content as if the server is on your own network. Whether you're interested in FactSet's proprietary content or third-party alternative data, our technology and solutions enable you to easily discover, evaluate, and implement the data and tools you need to power your investment workflow.
We're a financial services company, and we've been around for a while, and we're looking to integrate all of these data points and service all sorts of user classes across the industry. And so one of the problems that we've seen for a little while now is the fact that we just have so much information that our clients historically have had to pore over tables and charts and stuff. So what we want to do is we create this Signals product, which is supposed to be actionable insights that sort of find our clients as opposed to them having to dig through it. So some examples here. Essentially, we want to overcome this information overload and focus on meaningful research. So it's sort of a method of aggregating different content sets into a normalized way and meeting our clients where they are to provide a brief hint at sort of what might be interesting to them and then next steps for how to investigate it. So I think it's probably easiest to look at some examples. So these are some examples of signals that we've collected from a series of different content sets that we have. And we have our own in-house cognitive. So one of the cool ones here is S&P 500 predictions. So we're actually predicting when a company is going to be added to the S&P. We work with a lot of third-party data providers, such as news, but also credit rating companies, ESG companies to collect data there and transform those into a normalized signal. And then also just rules-based, some conditions are met for a company, a data point changes, and all of a sudden, something like an M&A sale was announced, right? That's an event, and we can just trigger a signal like that. So we're collecting all of these content sets and trying to provide meaningful information for our clients from them. This is an example of one that could be useful to someone. So this is the S&P 500 predictions. So one of our clients might come in to start doing research on a company, right? Say this MPWR company. And the first thing they see at the top is that, hey, we're predicting that this is going to go into the S&P 500. We can see then that it follows up with a street account when it actually happens. So a breaking news banner that it was added, 7 days later. So we're able to give folks a jump on some of the things that might be happening under the scenes that they would have to, collect data from across multiple applications to really figure out for themselves. So why adaptive cards to present this data? Well, for one, the whole idea behind signals are that they're both brief and they're atomic. So our entire strategy here is to provide data that you can skim kind of and really glean a lot from a little. So by nature, they're really small payloads with only a few data points. And we can kind of follow this guidance of like, if it's too big to be an adaptive card, it's probably too big to be a signal, because all of a sudden it just becomes, a new report. And so we've worked to follow this kind of idea and build out all of the UI representations of our signals as adaptive cards. So we have one of our flagship products is the FactSet Workstation, a series of web applications. And we've integrated into there with sort of a FactSet styled adaptive card. So this is some adaptive card data that's rendering there in the red box. We're able to integrate through Power Automate into Microsoft Teams and Outlook. So that's an example sort of on the right there of a message that's been pushed as an adaptive card. Adaptive card payloads are by nature very small. So that works with our product Fact Search, which is provides type ahead cards as someone's typing, and we can quickly flash that information to them and catch their attention at a reasonable speed. And again, off platform, this is all provided through an API first. So if we sell our API to a client and they want to extend our adaptive cards or just have that UI representation right off the bat, we can provide that to them. And CRM as well, so integrating into things like Salesforce and whatnot. So this is sort of the reason we went down this path and identified adaptive cards as a really sort of good idea and way to implement all of this. So continuing on, here's sort of an example of the power of using this as an adaptive card. So because we have all of our UI as in this adaptive card format, we're able to set up Microsoft flows for our clients. So for example, we can build this out so that when a user gets a certain type of email from anywhere really, but theoretically in this example, it's a FactSet alert, we can check if there's any signals for the companies that came through in that alert. And if they are, it'll post a message to the Teams channel with all of the UI present there. So that's super, super powerful. And it's a way to just sort of, again, meet the clients where they are and surface that information without them having to check every single portfolio company that they're watching for the day, every single day. So, we've loved adaptive cards for the Microsoft integration. A lot of our clients use Microsoft products, so that alone, being able to push into Outlook, Microsoft Teams, all of these different products has been huge for us. But sort of a problem that we've had is that a lot of companies have their own style signatures, the CSS that's really driving the cohesiveness of a product. So we've tried a couple of approaches to apply this, and I think it's alluded to in the docs, extensibility that adaptive cards provides, just beyond the native renderer. So one example of this, we actually were able to implement what we have is sort of what we call the Fusion design system. It's the way to hook up, responsiveness throughout our applications, all of our styles, different fonts and whatnot that sort of fact-setify, for lack of a better word, the UI here. So using this idea of extensibility and overwriting the internal render functions that Microsoft provides us, we were able to do something as simple as, first of all, override some of the global styles, and then just override a couple of elements, namely the column set and columns, to be transformed into what we call flex layouts and flex cells. So what you get is that these two are sort of, they get rendered using that same renderer, except instead of columns, it'll render all of that data inside of a flex cell. And you can see it actually breaks on the iPhone X and becomes rows. So, to do that, it really wasn't a lot of code. And I think that that's just sort of a powerful example of how, without waiting for responsiveness from Microsoft, which has a whole lot of other problems, making it work in Teams and Outlook and all of these other integration points, you can kind of do it yourself with not a lot of lift.
Awesome. That is super cool to see. I love that you guys took advantage of that. We've been chipping away at responsiveness internally, haven't really been able to share much yet, because again, we have to solve it in every platform, which has its own quirks. But that's really cool to see. I've always wanted to sort of see that happening where columns can just grow into a flex style. As a quick question on your design system and the Fusion UI renderer, is that cross-platform, or are you on a handful of platforms natively, or is it like JavaScript based, or what is your rendering tech?
Yeah, it is JavaScript based. It will render. I mean, we're rendering all of our web apps as JavaScript, I believe. I don't work on the mobile team or anything like that, so I'd have to double check. But the idea is that these are sort of view components under the hood that do render in. It's supposed to be across the board, any screen width properly. Yeah, so it is web based though.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so that was one thing, and that's sort of the newer. I think when we first tried to, like I said, FactSetify what we had, this sort of the functions to hook into that we needed weren't there and exposed. So on our first pass, what we ended up doing was sort of extending the schema to provide FactSet flavoring within FactSet context. So in this case, instead of overriding the renderer that Microsoft provided, my teammate Andrew wrote a renderer that will take an adaptive card schema and render it as is, except when it looks for an FDS attribute, in which case we were able to sort of define our own elements. So in FactSet, we have this concept of an infographic, which is a styled text block. And what you would end up doing is writing how that can compile down to adaptive cards, which would just be sort of 2 column sets with a text block, so that when the same schema and data points are plugged into the either renderer, the FactSet one inside our products renders with FactSet styles and FactSet components, but the adaptive cards one keeps that parity. So you can see here, we actually implemented a table. So this is a FactSet table, and we did our best for Microsoft. It's a little tough, but we know that's coming along from you guys. But yeah, so this was another sort of our first pass at it. And then I'm actually going to hand it off to Andrew, who wrote a really cool sort of WYSIWYG designer to talk about sort of how that works and a little bit more under the hood.
Yeah, so as Matt said, my name's Andrew. I'm another engineer here at FactSet, and I did a lot of work on our adaptive cards renderer and designer. And yeah, as Matt was saying, we have like a lot of these different views that we want to show for different signals. I think we're somewhere around 50 now. We want to have even more than that. So we wanted to have a solution where we can build out these cards to display in multiple environments, but we didn't want to have to, manage multiple different cards for different environments. So what we have here is just an extension of the adaptive cards that kind of allows us to keep our styling that we have inside of our internal application.
This is an example of, we initially built it out and we wanted, the adaptive card for the Microsoft products and that integration point, while also keeping, view and being able to keep it looking proper inside of our own products. And so what we did was we built this designer so that we're not building out a view component every single time. And this actually builds up that schema for both cases, right? So it adds on those FDS properties that signify to our renderer, hey, this is an infographic and therefore it should be styled this way. And the native Microsoft renderer just ignores it and renders as, a column.
Yeah, so I was just kind of showing you like how you can pull like any of those different components down and see just an example on the side of how it would be rendered. And this is just an excerpt of what will get written to that adaptive cards JSON file. So this is that second element that you were seeing in that last slide, that infographic group, which is really just two different text blocks. And you can see in the highlighted parts on the left side there that those are our extensions to the adaptive card schema, where we kind of just add some hints to the renderer saying, this text block here, we actually want this to be one of our existing components that we have already written in Vue. And just the way that the adaptive card schema is laid out made it really easy to just be able to map this directly to any kind of component library you might be using in JavaScript. So we're using Vue, and it's pretty easy for us to have this get mapped to just two Vue components for the different infographic text blocks. And then you can see on the right-hand side how this adaptive card JSON ends up getting rendered. So on the top side, you just have the regular text blocks with the bolder weight and the small spacing. Whereas on the bottom, you're seeing our components that are rendered in Vue with those overrides that we have in that FDS section. So this has really kind of helped us maintain a single template for each signal, while also being able to have a native looking appearance in both our application and any integrations we have, like Microsoft Teams or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that also something worth noting is that this approach, you had said the schema makes it really easy to extend. We sort of jumped on this bandwagon, like I said, almost a couple years ago. And I think the renderer was still in beta. We didn't really know a whole lot about it. And I think it's picked up a lot of steam since. But we felt, with this approach, we were comfortable enough that even if Microsoft decided to chuck adaptive cards as a product, that the schema was good enough that we could continue to support it internally. And, we had this power to do this. We'd obviously lose the Microsoft integration point, but it was still a really good approach for us just for internal rendering. But yeah, so those are sort of the two approaches that we've taken at FactSet to utilize adaptive cards and also extend it to get a lot of the features that aren't yet native, but I think that make it easier to support in our own environments. And I think it's a process, and maybe Matt and JP can speak a little bit more to it, but it seems like kind of the pattern that you're going for in terms of rendering inside of your own products, just from the sort of hints in the extensibility docs. But, just to mention, we've had a lot of good success there.
Yeah, it's really cool to see. The extensibility stuff was made for what you're doing, as an escape hatch, so people weren't always locked in. You guys came up with a table. It took us a little bit to get a table in there, and that's why we really wanted that. Not a lot of people are rendering cards. A lot of people are delivering cards into Teams and Outlook. Not everyone's rendering them in their own product, but it has proven to be a useful API for pretty much everyone who does decide to go the rendering route.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, that's pretty much our presentation. I put up a slide for questions or discussion or anything if anyone wants. I'm not sure what we're looking like time-wise on the presentation, if you guys want to take it back, but figured if you want, we could open the floor.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions related to FactSet, please feel encouraged to type them either in the chat or unmute and ask them. We're looking good on time, so no worries there.
I'll start and then raise my hand normally, the polite thing to do, and then call on myself. I'm curious if is all this stuff in production at this point?
Yes. So I know that all of the stuff that we're rendering inside of our reports and that's going out to most of our clients today. So that would be our own custom renderer. Internally, I know that we are using like adaptive cards in Teams. I'm not 100% sure if we have clients hitting that yet, but it's well in the pipeline and we have all the schemas. I could let maybe Shardul or Kyle comment on that. I believe we're on the call. But yeah, this is in front of clients. We've made sales and it's going really well.
Awesome.
Yeah, Matt, just to chime in, this is Kyle. We have a FactSet app in Teams that delivers adaptive cards through an API. It's not the signals content, but it is some other content. So.
Got it. Yeah, that's what I thought. Didn't want to say for sure, but yeah. Thanks.
I'll use the same approach that Matt just did and go ahead and ask my own question here. I'm curious, how long did it take to implement that custom designer that FactSet uses?
I'll let Andrew talk about that. That was his baby.
Yeah, so the internal designer, so there already is like that existing designer that just regular adaptive card supports. And we built our own designer for our own renderer to kind of just have like a more focused view of like just building out these cards that we have specifically for signals. It's like we had those couple of custom elements like that infographic group in the table. So it wasn't really too difficult to put all that together because, like I said, the format for adaptive cards maps pretty well to any kind of component system. So yeah, so that was like a pretty straightforward implementation that really just kind of helped simplify things in a way that let people that aren't necessarily like engineering focused to be able to use the components that we know that we want to use for our cards and just have like a really easy way of putting that together.
Yeah, we're engineers. We want to do literally nothing. So that's always the goal. Yeah, and it seemed like, I think you utilized third-party libraries for the drag and drop and all of that. And then, if you think about the schema, there's not a whole lot additional to it. All we had this sort of track was where those were positioned under the different. So like if an infographic is on the same level or underneath a column, that sort of makes sense. But sort of just hooking up the UI, and a lot of that stuff was written with third-party libraries. But I won't speak to the ease of it because I didn't write it. It seems like Andrew whipped it up pretty fast, a couple weeks or so.
I think this is the coolest thing about that, and it's just something I've learned and gotten really excited about adaptive cards over the years, is our CEO now, Satya, says citizen developer basically at every conference, which is really referring to power users and users of like the Power Platform. It hadn't even crossed my mind as an audience, and now I'd say a significant chunk of the folks on this call fall into that camp. They're power users, information workers out there who are using these technologies to automate things that previously we had to hire out, to ISVs to do, or all sorts of stuff. And adaptive cards has come along as this thing to enable them to build like these lightweight UIs where you don't have to have a lot of skill in that. And I think it's really cool just taking that concept and, whether you're using adaptive card designer is sort of less important than just making these things accessible to a broader range of users and use cases. So it's cool to see that.
Yeah, I think Shortle just posted, for what it's worth, the Signal product was shown 40,000 times in August. So yeah, it's definitely in front of some eyes.
Nice.
Yeah, that's great. It'd be interesting to see how the new table element that we have in 1.5 compares to the table that your team has implemented.
I can't wait to start working on that because I think we've run into some issues with that, like because we have to cut the text off so it doesn't wrap because that would throw off the whole alignment. So yeah. That's sort of what you end up seeing a lot of times with the ad hoc little table that we built in Microsoft using columns. So we're definitely excited to clean that up.
Yeah.
That's great. That might also be a good segue into the next part of the presentation. So thank you so much, Matt, for showing us everything about FactSet. It's definitely an exciting product, and the demo was great. My favorite part was the designer for sure. Now we will be talking about our 1.5 release. So we have shipped our 1.5 release of our schema, and the new features which you can find in this release will be right-to-left support, Input.Text masking, ActionSet overflow, Tooltip for actions, a new table element, a static filtered choice set, and also a new property known as isEnabled for actions. And I'll share just brief examples of these features in the upcoming slides. So this is an example of right-to-left support for text blocks. This is how it'll render once you enable right-to-left support. And this is a Boolean property that is at the adaptive card, container, and column level. So it really lets you design and style your card to support right to left. This is an example of Input.Text masking. This is a highly requested feature from members in our community, and we're glad to be able to provide this. And this is achieved via a new style known as password for text blocks or for Input.Text. This next example here is ActionSet overflow. So we have added the ability to put a secondary mode on actions. And if you label an action as a secondary action, you will actually get this overflow menu rendered, which will display the secondary actions. Another addition that we have in version 1.5 is Tooltip for actions. So now there is a tooltip property that you can add to your actions, and they'll provide a tooltip like the one shown in the slide. Another highly requested feature from our community has been a request for table. So in the past, you actually had to figure out how to make a table nesting different column sets, and now we actually provide an out-of-the-box table element implementation, which works just as you'd expect, and it's also a really good feature for accessibility. Next up, we have filtered choice sets. So it actually lets you filter, sort, and also autocomplete the options you have in Input.ChoiceSet. And finally, but not least, we have a new property for actions known as isEnabled. And this example right here shows you an action that is enabled when it's set to true, and then is enabled set to false, it'll disable the action. That pretty much wraps everything up. You can go ahead and download our latest packages for version 1.5. The only one that we are still, and the reason why we are still on GitHub, don't have any release notes or anything, is we're still working on shipping .NET. And as soon as we get that, there'll be a blog post, release notes on GitHub, and all that good stuff. All right, and now if anyone has any questions in the chat or anything, I'll be glad to take those.
Hey, my name is Ravi. This is my first call for Adaptive Teams meeting, and I'm new to Microsoft. The presentation was great. Thank you so much. I just have a question on this new version. So the features what you have highlighted, will this be working fine in Teams, or is there any limitation on that one?
Ravi, first of all, welcome. Welcome to the Adaptive Cards community. We're very happy to have you. And that's an excellent question. So there are some challenges currently with Adaptive Cards, and one of them is the way that our host applications adopt our new versions. So currently, Teams supports Adaptive Cards version 1.4, which is our previous release, and it supports it for bot-sent cards. So cards sent from Power Automate, as an example, anything that's sent with a bot, Teams supports it with version 1.4. And now that we have version 1.5, they'll be able to work to adopt that in Teams, but it's not currently out.
Okay, got it. Sure, thank you. Because I really like the table set feature, because like here in our project, I'm just trying to implement but right now everything is like there is no column sets. Like I cannot show the display or show the items in parallel, like in different column sets. So I would really like that feature and wanted to incorporate that in the Teams. But yeah, good to know that.
Yeah, no, awesome. And we have someone else that raised their hand.
Hello,
Chris.
I think this is Chris with Bay Technologies. Thanks for the great presentation. I have a question actually around the Adaptive Cards 1.4 integration with Microsoft Teams. You mentioned that cards with 1.4 are supported from Power Automate, but I've observed in the last 2 monthly calls that it's not working well coming from the Flowbot. When you post an adaptive card through Power Automate using the Flowbot, it does not render a 1.4 version card. I think you have to back it up all the way to version 1.2. Do you have any updates on when that will work, specifically coming from the Flowbot?
Hey, just sorry to interrupt you. I just want to add to him who said it's Matt. Yeah, I observed the same. Like when I try to use 1.4 version to generate adaptive card through Power Automate into Teams, I even faced the issue and then I had to roll it back all the way to 1.2 and then it started working. So yeah, just wanted to add that.
I think I may have misspoke there. So I wasn't referring to Power Automate supporting Adaptive Cards 1.4 yet. I knew that Team supported 1.4 for bot sent cards, and I mistook Power Automate by being one of those bot sent cards.
Yeah. They're aware. They're still trying to figure out when to get it in their schedule. It may be booked now. I actually haven't talked to them in about a month. But we are aware and nudging along the feedback. They're hearing the feedback. It's just trying to figure out where it fits in their stack rank. They have a laundry list of things they want to add, all really exciting stuff. And obviously this is one too. And if someone just said a visit on their roadmap for Q1, that does map to what I had heard. So hopefully that's right. I can't speak for that, but if you saw it officially written down, that makes sense. Q1 is about right what I was kind of hearing.
Awesome. Does anyone else have any questions? If not, I can look through the chat and see if there are any questions we have missed. So Gareth.
Not on this one, but just want to let you know that one was worked out, so the button works now.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear it, Craig.
Looks like Gareth Davies, you have your hand up.
Quick one. I know we've discussed Power Automate, but I assume Logic Apps will be a different timeline. I'm assuming that's a completely different team.
I don't know the answer to that. If anyone else on the call does, this is when you realize just how big of a company Microsoft is. I never quite understood the difference. I know Logic Apps is more or less the same thing, but in the Azure portal versus like your O365 portal is basically the extent of my knowledge of those two things. Yeah, I don't think we know it at this point.
Okay, I'll push the same folk that told me Q1 2022 for Power Automate, and I'll spot them and see what Logic App says. I'll let you know next.
Thanks. Sorry. Yeah, we sit pretty low in the stack. We just help people render the things, and then where people use it is always like quite a few steps removed. So let us know if you don't hear anything, but hopefully you've got some contacts you can get into. John, you had your hand up too.
Yes, I did. Thank you very much. My name is John Bataille. I've just started using Adaptive Cards and Power Automate, and one of the things that I've run into that's a bit of a problem for me is using like at comments if you're posting an adaptive card to a channel or Teams. Is there any word or thought on if at some point that will be implemented for sending adaptive cards as opposed to having to do it using the Graph API? Because everything else I've read pretty much says use the Graph API. That's the only way to do it. And it's not really clear how you format an adaptive card for the Graph API. And I apologize if this is not the right audience for that question.
Which Graph API? I'm sorry, I was responding to a question in the chat. I missed the first part of that.
Yeah, so for sending adaptive cards through the MS Graph API 1.0 for being able to do like add comments and things like that, the formatting of the graph of the adaptive cards is not really clear to me how you do it. And there's no real good documentation on the adaptive card side, and there's no real good documentation on the MS Graph API side either. So.
Gotcha. And when you say add comment, which product are you adding a comment into?
So using Power Automate to send out an adaptive card, and within that adaptive card to do an at channel or at user.
Okay.
Right? You can't do that natively using like Power Automate and an adaptive card. That doesn't seem to be supported.
Yeah, and I know they just announced some @mention stuff within Teams, but I don't know if that also got plumbed along through Power Automate. Is there a Stack Overflow or anything that you guys typically post that to, and we can maybe ping that team with a link? I know some @mention stuff was announced in Teams just a couple months ago. Let me try and find that blog post.
Yeah, I'm not too sure on that one either, John. But I will go ahead and drop my email in the chat, and I can definitely reach out to the right people in the Power Automate world to see if we can get either a workaround or if we can get some more information on their plans for supporting this scenario if it's not an already supported one.
Just to answer the question, @mentions are simply not supported in adaptive cards, not in Teams, not in Outlook. So whether or not Power Automate would be able to format those and put them in an adaptive card, it would still not show as an actual @mention in Teams or Outlook or anywhere. We have that in the backlog, or at least as something to consider doing in the future, but there's no ETA as to if or when @mentions will be supported in adaptive cards. If they are, eventually, the syntax for supporting them is going to be probably very easy. Just a matter of basically specifying the user ID alongside the @sign in the card payload, and it would just work.
Okay. Thank you.
Looks like we have another person with their hand up. Aaron?
All right. Good evening, all. Okay, from my side, good evening. All right. So just like the last person, I'm also new to using adaptive cards. So for a client, I am working on bringing SharePoint news notifications into Microsoft Teams, and I use adaptive cards. I think I shared a picture on a screenshot on the comment section. But basically, when I'm done with the card, on the description page, like for the description, the at body get file properties description, I want it to be a brief description, not full description. Because whenever a news post is posted, it could be a very long article. And then whenever the adaptive card picks up the description, it picks up the whole article, and this breaks the Power Automate. It breaks the flow doesn't work. But it's a very brief description. It shows up in Microsoft Teams, but it's a very long article. It doesn't show up. I don't know if I can get any help for that.
I think you would have to use one of the substring functions within Power Automate. You could do it I think I'm not super familiar with, I believe that their language is called Power FX. But you should be able to substring. Now, I don't know if that's going to get you, if it's like HTML content, you might strip it out in the middle of an HTML tag, so it might not be perfect, but I think that's going to be one of your ideal approaches. And I can try and send you a link to that substring, but basically I just put a link to some docs there. So that should help, where you basically say, I want the substring of this. You start at 0, and then you say, if you only want 100 characters, you pass a number, and it'll trim that down to a length that you specify.
All right, thank you.
Cool. Chris, you had your hand up?
Yeah, hello, Chris again. Another quick question. Teams webhooks doesn't appear to support the Action.execute from 1.4. Is that a limitation of Teams that will always be that way, or are there any plans to allow that function to work from Teams webhooks?
I am not sure if the Teams PM, Steven, he usually joins this call and takes the Teams questions. I'm not sure if he's on this one particularly, but I do believe that the Action.execute is a current limitation of Teams support for version 1.4.
I know we announced some stuff, I think at Build. I'm trying to find these blog posts, but I'm coming up short. There are a whole bunch of blog posts that Teams puts out on the Teams blog, where we announced a bunch of 1.3 stuff. I think it was back in March. I can remember all this stuff back in March. And we announced a couple webhook things. We announced the input validation stuff, things like that. So I think there were some improvements there, but I can't, for whatever reason, recall what that improvement was. So I would say see if you can figure out what we announced. Like all those features, any changes there would be announced in a blog post and then updated via our docs. I'm just searching around. But unfortunately, it doesn't look like there's anyone from the Teams platform team that would help us answer that.
Thanks.
Sorry, Matt, what was the question? Because I am actually here.
So sorry, yeah. I was, for whatever reason, picturing Jaspi, which is a long time ago. Whether 1.4 Action.execute works in incoming webhooks.
In incoming webhooks. So yeah, connectors, is that what we're talking about?
Channel webhooks. So
Yes.
if you have a webhook for a channel, yeah.
Yeah, that I don't think it works there, and I'm not sure there is a plan to make it work at this point. Yeah, I don't have a better answer than Matt, unfortunately.
Cool. Samuel, you were up next.
So I have two questions. So one, I realized that there were updates for the adaptive cards in Teams when you actually performed an action. Let's say if you clicked on a button that did a submit on execute, you will see this, how do you call it, a toast with a success below the adaptive cards. Is there a way to disable or go around that? That's the first question, because sometimes within the flow of, interacting with the bot in Teams is a bit of a, it looks a bit funny or to see all this green success thing is quite annoying in some cases. So that's one. And the second part is there a way, let's say we're building a bot which is hosted within Teams by using the bot composer framework. So there are some, we're showing adaptive cards based on certain user responses. Is there a way to replace an already rendered adaptive cards within a bot response? So these are my two questions.
So I'm going to take on those two. So the first one, the message that appears, so currently, no, you cannot control that. It will appear and that's it. However, we've very recently started having a conversation about potentially changing that. I'll make sure that the team knows we got explicit feedback from you. So there is a possibility that in the future we'll make it possible to not show this thing. As to the ability to replace a card, so the 1.4 release that introduces the universal action model, so Action.execute, is in large part about being able to do that easily. So the Action.execute model makes it possible for the bot to return a new card as a result of an action being executed. So if you updated your bot to using the universal action model, you get that capability. Now, I do understand that updating to the universal action model might not be what you want to do, at least not immediately. And there is a way to update a card asynchronously from your bot. So it's by sending an update operation back to Teams. I do not have the precise details in mind, but it is actually possible. You would need to know the ID of the card that you want to replace and just send that update activity with that ID and the new card payload, and you can replace the card in that context.
All right, looks like we have time for one last question. So, John, do you want to go off mute?
Sure. I've just been really struggling with, I'm using templates in a bot to generate a card. I use the template, the Teams bot template, and the samples come with like a 1.4 bot, 1.4 card, a learn and a welcome. And I am just really struggling to get cards that I've used in Outlook and anything else to work with the new. Well, actually, the render works just fine. It replaces it all. It's always on when the send activity gets called with the attachment card in it, and I keep getting this crazy error that says something to the effect of, hold on a second, I'll give you the exact verbiage, but it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. The bot, encountered an error, uncategorized sanitation library exception, object reference not set to an instance of the object. Well, I know I know it's set. If I strip down the bot, so and replace the code, the stuff back to a plain vanilla, I can get it back to where it's like really stripped down, and it'll send the card. The card will display, but it's always in displaying those bots, those cards that are a little bit more sophisticated. I mean, Action Execute seems to kill it, but the samples have 1.4 in them, so why shouldn't I be able to do that? Any advice on how to solve that? I mean, to debug that problem, because it's not in code that I can really see. And the card, I'm doing a debug and everything on it, and I see that the card data is rendered just fine. And it looks just like the other cards, except it's just more sophisticated.
So you're running into some issues when trying to build on top of a sample that Teams provides for 1.4, right?
It's the sample Teams toolkit bot that gets that gets created within the bot system. And I'm using React, the React example. So I mean, it's the crazy part is it's just the Teams bot seems to work just fine. If I go back and just do a learn or a welcome, it sends me a good card. But when and if I put plain vanilla in my card, it looks okay. But when I try to do an action execute or have any level of sophistication in the template, in the data, I get this weird error. I'm just wondering if there's some sort of library issue or buffer overflow or something that I can't see. I mean, the value not set issue, that's like a JavaScript, like variables empty type of error, but I know it's not. The card's there. I mean.
So, John, I think what would really help our team is if you would be able to open up an issue on our GitHub. We have a bug report template, and if you can just provide like the repro steps that you have, and our team will be able to triage it and hopefully get an answer back to you.
Okay. So just one quick question just to help me understand this better. Should a 1.3 card upgrade to 1.4 without a problem?
Ordinarily, yes, but in practice, there's a little bit of quirks. I believe to make it work in Teams specifically, you have to set version to 1.4.
Okay, but for example, in this problem, I took the one card that's out there on the developer site, and it's a 1.3 card that's like an expense report one.
Yeah.
And I put the template, the data, and render it, and try to run that card. No changes. I can make sure I can do it one more time and make sure I change those two the values to 1.4, but it won't render it. It renders it. Correction. It renders it. Shows me the rendered card if in the debug, but in Teams it doesn't display it.
Doesn't display at all, or it turns out. It
doesn't display. It gives me that same error.
Are you sending just the template or the rendered card into Teams?
The rendered card. It has template, it has data. I have so I just do a combine. Looks good. I mean, I read the rendering, the rendered, template data combination. Looks beautiful, But when I try to do that, that card, it's a send activity, and that seems like that would be just the easiest part. Just send the data to Teams, or just to the output, and it blows up there. I don't have a problem opening a ticket, but it just seems strange. And I figured it was something that I was doing that you need to change this one little thing, or and it'll work. But kind of crazy.
Yeah, sorry about the troubles. We'll definitely have to get a little more specific. I mean, we'll need the details just because we're just we're somewhat familiar with all of our platform partners enough to try and help, but like we don't intimately know the specific details of each platform at where we sit in the stack, unfortunately.
Okay.
And we do weekly triages twice. So I'm not sure, it's not bi-weekly, but twice a week that we do triages on our GitHub repo for all these types of issues. So if you go ahead and file one, it'll be pretty quick when we hopefully can get back to you with either an answer, or if it's a bug, we can track it down to the right team.
Sounds good to me.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining the call. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.